Yeah, the goal of this panel, because I explained many times before, we're not going to have a true movement for the proletariat, a true movement for the workers. There is no anti-establishment movement that's happening unless we address the police state that we live in right now. The police do not protect you; they exist to serve capital. And they will always turn their back against the workers and fight against the activists that are fighting for change against the system. That's why you see countless videos of these police state goons beating up protesters that is like Marshall for Line 3, indigenous activists, people that are demanding change. The police hired by the capitalist thugs are there to squash that protest. And I want, before we get started, there's a lot to say because we got a lot of great guests that we want to introduce, and we also got a great video that we want to play. So let me know if we should get to that as well. If we still have Alice coming through, because this panel, big shout out to my friend Ak, who helped us pull the new panel together. Ak was originally scheduled, but he had last second changes, but he helped us get a lot of great guests for this panel, because what the focus is: how do we organize against this police state? What are the steps that need to be taken so we can challenge this law enforcement system that is imposing regressive fines and fees on the working class via civil asset forfeiture? They constantly impose and violate our human rights. So we got a lot of great guests. Zoya, I won't allow you to introduce them, because Zoya, once again, I cannot emphasize enough, Zoya and Ak really save this panel because we have a few guests pull out. And I want to thank every single guest that you guys gonna hear us call up, because they kind of agreed to this last second just because they're very passionate about this issue. So every single person that joined us today, I want to thank you guys for making time for us here. So let's start with Carl, and since you know them more than I do, Zoya, let's start with Carl if you want to introduce them, and then I want to introduce the roundtable that we have. Um, Welcome to the RBN Activist Summit, Carl. Do you want to introduce yourself for an audience who may not know your work, kind of what you kind of activism you engage in, and what you advocate for? Carl, if you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Sure, I'm gonna be humble about it because I don't like introducing myself, but that's fine for the movement. So my name's Carl Williams. I'm a lawyer, an activist organizer. I went to law school so I could, support the people, support our movements for liberation and freedom. And I at Cornell University at the law school here, and I teach a clinic and have students work on issues of social justice. We call it movement lawyering, to support people when they're arrested, when they're charged, when they're trying to understand what their incredibly limited rights are under the Constitution and federal and state laws, and how to navigate those things to build power in our movements and to protect ourselves with those kind of weak sauce tools. I've been part of the National Lawyers Guild for a long time. I sort of hail from Boston. Generally, I'm in Ithaca, New York right now, actually at Cornell Law School.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. And once again, and that's same to go to all our guests, because I know you guys agreed to join us pretty last second, and I'm very interested in hearing you guys' perspective, especially on this issue. This is an issue that we focus on a lot. Our next guest that we're bringing on is Alan Dettlaff. Hopefully, I'm saying that correct, sir. Thank you for joining us. In the same, just because this is an introduction for you guys, if you want to introduce yourself, don't have to be too long, very brief, and how you got into this, interested in this topic and the kind of work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Alan Dettlaff. I'm Dean of the Graduate College of Social Work at the University of Houston and a 10 Demands endorser. And I'm also the co-founder of the Up-In movement, which is a movement that seeks to abolish the child welfare system or the foster care system. And I really appreciate the invitation to be here, because I think it's important to point out that the police state includes Child Protective Services.
Absolutely.
Disproportionately surveils, separates, punishes Black children and families, and has been doing that since its origins. Child Protective Services separates over 250,000 children from their parents every year, and it goes largely unrecognized. Wow. So the Up-In movement seeks to abolish the Child Protective Service system, but also frame it in this larger abolition movement.
I definitely had to pick your brain on that topic as we continue this conversation, because that's such an important detail that a lot of people miss out in terms of the role that the police state plays. And I know people that have been through horror stories because of that. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you on that. I'm going to get to our next guest as well. Thank you for joining us, Edwin Lindo. Thank you for joining us pretty last notice as well. Do you mind giving yourself a quick introduction so the audience know who you are and the kind of work you engage in and why you're passionate about this issue?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Can y'all hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, so this has kind of been my life's work. I grew up in the inner city in San Francisco in the Mission District. And a lot of the organizing that you get laid on as a child, trying to see how you fight against oppressive regimes and structures of just survival. I was lucky enough to end up going to law school. So I also went to law school at the University of Washington. Currently, I'm an assistant dean at the School of Medicine, where I teach critical race theory, health justice, and trying to teach doctors and trainees how we need to stop killing Black and brown bodies that enter into our healthcare system. But how that relates to the carceral penal police system is that my organizing was around the police terror that took place in San Francisco, and a lot of organizing, again, in the inner city, and ended up doing an 18-day hunger strike to get the police chief fired about 7 years ago. He eventually was fired, but it showed that, right, when you organize and bring community together, some pretty amazing things can happen.
Absolutely. Well said, Edwin. I want to bring in our last guest, Tiffany Flowers. I appreciate you making time to join us. So for people who are not familiar with your work and who you are, do you want to give a brief introduction and why you think and why you got into the passionately into this topic?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Tiffany Flowers. I use she, her pronouns. I don't know. I've been an organizer for a long time. I organized in labor for almost 20 years and then made the switch over to the nonprofit space. I currently run a campaign called The Frontline, which is a joint venture between the Working Families Party and the Movement for Black Lives, Electoral Justice Project, The Rising Majority, and United We Dream. I'm also one of the authors of the Breathe Act. And so when I met Awkward and was able to talk to him about the 10 demands and, our common belief system and then, ask me to be part of this conversation, I just wanted to come share my thoughts and learn from other experts and leaders.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. And as you guys know, my co-host, my great friend Zoya's Life, helped co-found 10 Demands with us, which I'm glad. I appreciate all you guys for endorsing that, because policing always been an issue. Obviously, as a Black man growing up in this police state, something that always impacted me. And then when I met with Zoya and Ak, I was able to put my anger into practice, into real theory, and able to express the problems that we all see in real time. So I want to pass it to Zoya, just in case people are not 100% aware. Like, I want to, for you to give your background, like the background behind 10 Demands and the goal and the ideology that we have when we form that group. And then I'm going to open up to the panel for some criminal justice discussion. But Zoya, you have anything you want to add?
Yes, I've been an activist for decades now. I entered originally through the environmentalism space and then just kept going through the ranks towards marijuana legalization in California, and really got to know our political process and our injustice system, and just had to evolve my approach as we moved along, and followed all of the guidelines that we were told to, and hit roadblocks and weren't able to implement the things that made sense on paper, policies that had majority support from voters. We were able to make some gains because marijuana is now legalized in California, and we are pushing for nationwide legalization. But also we realized that community organizing is really what needs to happen on a local level, and we need to help each other and ourselves. And that's why it's so important. And I'm so happy that we're all here to join the second annual General Strike Summit, the Activist Edition, to share our thoughts on our activism and resources, and let people know how they can get involved locally in their communities, because this is something we need to build up from the grassroots, from the ground up. And I'm so happy that all of you guys are here to share your valuable knowledge and insights.
Yeah, and once again, I cannot emphasize enough. I appreciate you guys for joining us very last second. And big shout out to Ak, my friend Awkward, for helping put this together. And this is something I want to bounce off your guys' head, because this is the Activist Summit. So we're talking about ideas that we can put in action. When I look at politics right now, especially American politics, I see two major political parties that agree a lot on a lot of important issues. for example, policing. You have the Democrats right now competing against Republicans saying, "Oh, we want to fund the police more. We're the party of the police." Then you have the Republicans saying they're the party of the police. So my personal belief is that if we're serious about changing the carceral state that we live in right now, we got to disengage from the two-party system and focus on building a third-party coalition and outside working-class coalition to challenge the prison industrial complex system, whether that be through direct activism. We've seen people who support defund the police, 10 demands, and many different abolitionist groups. So I'm going to go around the panel. We can kind of keep it open as well. I'll call on people if needed so we can kind of bounce ideas off each other. But I'm going to start with the first person we introduced with, Carl. What do you think is the best route for people who are serious for a reform change in the police state? Like, do you think people should be asking for defund? Like, what do you think the proper route that activists should be taking right now? If you want to take that topic on broadly, and we can bounce some ideas off each other.
I'm going to answer this question differently than I would have probably about 5 years ago, because before I think we want to say we need people to understand, we need people to stand up. But in the George Floyd uprisings, we had the largest number of people in the history of the United States of America like stand up. So we don't need more people, right, to say I want to stand up for Black liberation. I want to stand up against police violence and murder of our people in our communities. What I think we need is for those people to understand their own power, for us to understand our own power. Because I think if you talk to a lot of those people, I do talk to a lot of those people, people they say like, well, it would be good if police weren't allowed to choke us to death. Maybe it would be good if they had cameras on them. Possibly it would be good if they weren't allowed to hit us over the head or use chemical weapons on us. And we're dithering around the edges, right? We're whittling at these things, right? And when people hear other things like defund the police, abolish ICE, they're like, oh, what? That actually, I didn't think of that. I'm a little bit afraid of you saying it because it sounds too much of a large solution. But I think one of the things is in our hearts, in our minds, with our people, in our organizing, we have to make people believe that dramatic change for good is possible. Like to liberate people is possible. I really think that that's a core piece of, we're afraid of our own power, right? We don't actually need more power. We just need to effectuate the power that we have, right? And, if people and I don't mean to, this isn't me decrying, those protests and the organizing that's happened. It's me saying we need to take that to another level, right? And I think I'll just say we as lawyers and educators, I think can encourage people of that because it's in our histories, right? It's in the history of Black people. And this I always compare it to chattel slavery, right? People say, well, we can't do that. Capitalism is too big, right? The police are too big. Their budgets are too big. And I say, let's line this up against the system of chattel slavery that exists in this country. Because basically Black women organized to stop that, right? Other people got on board, but that was who was at the core of it. And then Black men and then a bunch of other people, right? Quakers and some other people. But I ask people, I say, when you line those things up, right, the system of oppression that exists now and the system of chattel slavery that existed then, how much, I don't really have an answer to this question, but which one of those things is bigger? Which one of those things was more difficult to organize against and stop? I don't really have an answer to that. I don't particularly care about the answer to that. Yeah. But I think if we compare those two things, it's like, shit, our ancestors did this, right? And many of the people who are on this call right now are here because that happened in the past. So we owe it to them, right? When I see people that have that shirt that says, what is it, like, I am my ancestors' greatest dream or something, I always think like, I want to get a shirt that says, I owe my ancestors for my freedom. And I'm working to pay that back. It's too long for a shirt, but I'll put it in a tweet, right? Or someone else can. But I think that's really like, if we really believe we can, one, we really need to believe that we can be free. And two, we need to do the things to affect that, to make that happen. And we know what there's a whole bunch of the old things that people did in the past to make that happen. And there's a whole bunch of things that we're inventing in the future. Maybe this is one little piece of that to make that happen. So we need to believe it and get on it.
Yeah, absolutely, Carl. I want to pass it to Alan, if you want to pick up from there. The topic being, what will your suggestion be on the messaging and the strategies that anyone who, I was about to say left, but I don't even like using that term anymore. Anyone who want to liberate our community from the police state. What do you think strategies in messaging from us should be based on your experience? Very vague.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, just to follow up on what Carl said, I think pointing this back to chattel slavery is really important because in one sense, abolition already happened, so we know it's possible. But when you really look at what the vision of abolition was back during the time of chattel slavery, it wasn't just the ending of slavery. It was the recreation of a society where Black people were really free and liberated. And that's the part that still hasn't happened.
Exactly.
Even Frederick Douglass, going back to the South after abolition of slavery, decried the whole movement and said, this is not what abolition is about because we're still not free. I think the problem now is, when it comes to the Democrats and the Republicans, too many people have been fooled by the Democrats' lie that if you don't vote for us, the Republicans will win.
Yes.
And they keep voting for Democrats over and over and over, even though they know how much the Democrats love the police and continue to throw money at the police. They keep voting for Democrats because they believe it's their only option. If they don't, the Republicans will win, and then that will be even worse. But if all of us keep doing that, if we keep putting Democrats in office, nothing's ever going to change. So the strategy has to be, as going back to what Carl said, recognize our collective power, and collectively, if we stop voting for Democrats, get the Democrats out and start voting for some real third party or other party candidates that believe in the values that we believe in. That's the only way we're going to bring about change, because Democrats and Republicans are the same thing. They just have slightly different PR strategies.
Yeah, and to that point, Alan, I make this. I play this example to people all the time. The last press secretary, Jen Psaki, and this wasn't reported. We covered this on RBN. She was asked this question. She was asked, "Why are you guys funding the police more, despite the fact that people was in the streets in 2020 in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd?" You guys want to know the answer that she gave? She said the reason why we are funding the police more is because Biden ran on doing that. And you guys voted for me, so you guys gave us the mandate of doing that. Do you guys see why voting for people who have ideas that are completely counter to ours could be counterproductive? So I love the point that you bring up, Alan. We'll go to Edwin and then Tiffany next regarding the messaging, the strategies, and how we should be engaging the issue of criminal justice. Edwin, if you want to pick up on anything that Carl or Alan said, you are free to do so as well.
Yeah, right on. No, and what's been said is so great. As an educator, as a popular educator, I'm also, with my wife, a co-founder of Estelita's Library, which is a social justice library here in Seattle, that its goal is to bring radical literature and ideas and thoughts and books to our folks. And I love here in Rome, I just heard for the first time, right, that y'all are buying a library, or he's buying a building to build a library. And to me, right, if we think about where movement starts, at least with the Panthers, right, it was in the back rooms of bookstores, right? And that's important because I think the study, the analysis, the community building has to be clear on what our history is. And it's nothing about being an evangelist for socialism, for capitalism. It's let's read the history. And their history tells us that while they told us they abolished slavery with the 13th Amendment, the 13th Amendment tells us it has not abolished slavery. And so this conversation of chattel slavery still exists today in our face, right? 13th Amendment says no involuntary servitude shall be allowed except if duly convicted of a crime. Well, we know this. We know the data. Carl probably knows it better than anyone here. Is that there is no duly conviction of a crime when there is a racialized state that says if you are Black, you are more likely to be put in prison. And so we have 2 million slaves that sit in our country that we then force into slave labor to make $90 to $1.50 a day. And they say, no, this is just a rehab program for folks to learn how to get job skills. Oh, that's nice. Well, why do the Fortune 100 companies get to utilize free labor to make their money and their profits? And when you're talking about strategy, what comes to mind is, I think as folks who are anti-capitalist, if we have to understand capitalism exceptionally well, right? We have to understand how it works, how it maneuvers, how it strategizes. And one thing that I think is important is that these are folks who are not getting paid minimum wage. So if we're about workers' rights, then maybe one strategy is we say, okay, you're going to use slave labor. We're going to require that it be at least minimum wage. They have the right to unionize inside. And what do you think is going to happen? Well, knowing how capitalism worked, and to say, no, well, then we won't give them jobs inside. right? We're going to take it out and we're going to bring it here into the communities that it'll be less expensive. But it would force, so let's say, for example, a city mandated by law that you can't operate or get a business license if you use prison labor. Well, that'll change the way that businesses operate. That will change the way that they look or react to things. And so that's one strategy that has always come to mind. I think additionally is realizing that prisons and jails throughout the country are used as a tool of overrepresentation in Congress by rural communities that will get grant money to build prisons, get prisoners into those beds, and then use that as the population for congressional representation in Washington, D.C. It's for folks to be clear here. If you go to jail, wherever you reside in that jail, they use you to get representation in D.C. You don't get the representation in the community you grew up in. It's in the rural Boudonk place that is literally the most racist place you can imagine. And they're making not only money, they're also getting power in DC to make sure they can get more prisons, to get more of our folks inside.
Yeah, thank you for a lot of insight. I want to get Tiffany Flowers in here. A lot of the work that you do on this topic. I would love to hear what your thoughts on in terms of what our movement messaging should be, our strategy should be, and how we should approach the issue of policing in a very vague way. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Thanks. Yeah, I would going back to what Carl was actually talking about in terms of I think really baseline education, you know, and accessibility, I think is also a huge issue in terms of power building, right? Helping folks understand our power lies in very, very baseline and incremental ways. I think one of our strategies should be to, and it's such a cliche to say it, but it's really about meeting people where they are and understanding how much we already do to keep our own community safe, how much work we already do to naturally interrupt violence and keep people safe, right? We actually keep us safe. And so one of the things I had talked to when I spoke to Aqua's about, one of my favorite exercises about abolition in community spaces when people are just starting to really grapple with this concept, is to have people close their eyes and imagine what is the most beautiful day, a really beautiful day in their community. What is it like? And oftentimes people will lift up, laughing children and food sharing and cookouts and block parties and all of these beautiful, happy things. And they never, ever, ever bring up police. They never ever bring up, handcuffs. They never bring up mace. They never bring up tanks. They never bring up all the things, the features of the police state. And so I think helping people understand when we talk about abolition, when we talk about changing paradigm shifts and big, big changes from what people are used to, I think it's incumbent upon us, the organizers, the leaders, the people that are engaging this conversation, that are leading and pushing this fight, to make it very, very accessible and make people understand and have a true vision for what that could look like, as opposed to like policy jargon and some of the fear mongering, doing the work of the other side, but actually really, really making it plain how life could look, what our lives and communities would be like, what opportunities that would create for freedom, and helping people really, really, really grapple with that vision.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. Now I'm gonna pass it to my host, Zoya. Anything you want to add to that regarding what our messaging should be and our strategy should be in terms of engaging our police? Anything you want to add before I move on to the next part?
Yes. So just to touch on what everyone was saying, absolutely, we have to meet people where they're at. I strongly agree with that. And I'm not so concerned where people are right now, because our system indoctrinates people with propaganda and through many ways to support the police. It's a fear-based system where people think that police are the only things that are protecting them. But in reality, when we look at statistical data, we know that police only solve 2% of crime. And the people that are being held in jail, 75% of them are pre-trial and have never been convicted of a crime. So we have criminalized poverty in this country, simply keeping people behind bars that couldn't afford bail. We know the racial disparities in policing. So when we talk about defunding the police, we're looking at city budgets and acknowledging that over 50% of funds go to policing who actually don't prevent crime. And we're ignoring funding policies that we know stop crime by funding education, job opportunities, healthcare, housing, things that actually prevent people by meeting their needs from going towards performing anything that's criminal. Also, 1 in 5 people incarcerated are incarcerated for drugs because our drug policies serve the carceral state. So when we talk about defunding the police, we talk about funding community. That's really what it is. We talk about reallocating resources to where the community needs are. And that's what I want people to really understand about abolition. And I'm very proud of what we put together at 10 Demands, which is a road towards abolition. And we go step by step addressing structural problems and how we can practically change them.
And as you see here, as you see, in our 10 demands, demand number 1 is defund the police and reallocate resources to impact the community. Now I'm gonna go the other way. I'm gonna go backwards this time. So I'm gonna call on Tiffany first. I debated our friend of the show, Garland Nixon, who's very passionate about criminal justice reform as well. But there are a lot of discussions about the term defund and the slogan defund. And what I've seen from the mainstream media is attempts to demonize and scare people away from using this. And my personal belief, I think it's important for us to engage the fiscal conversation when it comes to policing, because when you look at military budgets, our policing will be the 3rd highest military budget in the world. We spend more on our policing than other countries do on the military. The NYPD spends 3 times more on their policing than the DPRK spends on the military. You know, the country that they demonize as being militaristic, one city spends more than their entire military. So I want to pass this question around to the panel, because the media has been doing their best to not only demonize the movement, but demonize abolition, defund. And I don't. And if you guys disagree, feel free to speak plainly about it. But what do you guys think about this whole debate about slogan, messaging? Tiffany, do you want to take that on? We go pretty much the exact opposite order this time.
Sure. I mean, I think I'm going to give much of the same answer in terms of meeting people where they are, law and order, the implications of the media using defund as a weaponizing defund is none of it is new. Everything that we've done in our tradition of our Black liberation struggle and general liberation struggle work is always demonized. So I'm not surprised, but I do think, again, it's incumbent upon us to really, really, really help. I always think about my little cousins, the people in my neighborhood, right? If they don't understand what defund actually means, then we're not doing our work and we're leaving people behind. And so really what we have to do is say, when we say defund the police, we're actually talking about the fact of, if your brother, if your sister, if your community member is in crisis, and we can clearly see that something is going wrong with our good neighbor, and we want to see them get help, and we don't want to witness violence, we don't want to put their life in further danger by calling 911, wouldn't it be nice if there was a number that you could call and that somebody would meet them with compassion and somebody would meet them with care and really try to help this person figure out what's the best thing to do to get help? If your child is in a school with dilapidated walls and asbestos problems and inadequate books and teachers and supplies, wouldn't it be nice to know that the people who are walking the halls with guns aren't there anymore, because that money has been put into making sure your child has as lovely a facility as any other child in any well-funded community across America? And so again, it's really about making things very plain, taking the time. My good friend Jessica Bird always talks about, when we are talking about our dreams, we can't miss a step. And I think that's so important for us to understand that, like, we may have intellectual understanding, we may have policy jargon, we may have facts and figures and numbers and all of the things that make our argument right to us, right? But if my grandma, my aunties, and your uncles and cousins and young adults in your family don't understand that defund actually only means, again, funding war on our communities and taking that money to actually support healthy, vibrant, well-fed, well-educated, safe communities, that's all that means. And that when people hear us say defund the police, and they're very clear on what we mean, that it's actually a war on our community and keeping us left behind. It's a war on keeping us living in a police state and unhealthy and unfed and unsafe. And so it's our work to actually unboogeyman defund and make people really understand that defund is actually a love movement. It really is. It's about taking what we know is possible and enacting it and making it possible in our communities.
Very well said, Tiffany. I want to go to Edwin, then we go Alan next. What are your thoughts on the demonization of the defund movement, the slogan, and what are your general thoughts on that, Edwin?
Yeah, I mean, it's expected, really. The truth is that when, and some of the folks on the panel were saying this, is we have to imagine a future that we've never lived in. And that's a scary thing to do. That's actually the most difficult work, is that this freedom, the liberation, is something we haven't felt. And it can be terrifying to a lot of folks. And you say defund the police, but I've been told my entire life, but they're the ones who protect me. And Zoya brought up the stats, right? It's how do you protect me when the thing already happened and you show up as a detective now? You didn't stop the crime. You're a detective. So why are you called a police officer? What are you actually doing? And then two, it's then saying, if you're supposed to stop crime from happening, additionally, we also have recidivism rates of 75%. So that means our prisons aren't supposedly working according to how they say it's supposed to work. And that's why being an abolitionist, it actually only makes sense, because we're like, we're giving money to folks that come out of taxes to literally terrorize us. And so when we say, and I've heard some folks say, not only do we defund, we want a refund. You've sold us a fake ticket that you're supposed to protect us, and you haven't done it. Because if any other group, the work that I do, anyone else here does such a poor job like our policing in this country, every single one of us would have been fired, right? If we would have accidentally harmed someone, if we would have misspoke, if we would have said racist things, we would have been fired on the spot. These folks not only not get fired, they have police unions that make sure they have money in the bank to protect them with the quote unquote best lawyers in the country. And then the last point I would make is that they also have run a game on the understanding of what it means to be workers, right? Police have somehow convinced the world that they are part of the workers class. And by definition, they can't be. You are holding a gun. And when there is a protest, when there is a when there is a union that's getting out and demanding better wages, they literally have to cross the picket line. That is their job. Their job is to cross the picket line with the gun in their holster. And they want to say that they are with the worker. They can't be. Exactly. Right. And so it's a scam. The police union is not a union of workers. It's a union of ensuring that you have folks, as you said in the beginning, Nick, that protect the Capitol. Because the way I put it is, when you have police for protest demanding justice for our community, which way are the police facing? Right. They're looking at us protecting the buildings. And Absolutely. I'm asking the question, well, why are you protecting the buildings from us?
Yeah,
why are you supposed to be protecting us? Supposedly. But then when you have certain other communities, like white women that go in mass in the streets wearing pink hats and say, oh, we're here to be with police. The police then do what? They're protecting them from what they say are potential threats from other people. And I'm like, yo, y'all have made it very clear where your interests lie. And it's not with actually the freedom of communities that have been oppressed and put under. So I think it's when we make clear, and it's made clear when we get in the streets, who they're there for. Because I have never, at least in the organizing I've done, I've never seen a police officer. So you know what? I'm done. I'm protesting with you.
I remember Edwin on that point. That's such a good point you make, because I remember I hosted my call and I talked to a lot of the viewers of the show, and maybe people who just so happened to see the show as well. Some guy was asking me this question. He said, "Do you think it's a good idea to try to organize with cops who may be discontent with the system?" And my response was, "Hell nah." There's no way. No way. The cops, you gotta understand their role. Their job is not to protect you. They're not just some guy who doing the job. They are there to protect capital. These are the people who are most likely are counter-revolutionary. Think about the kind of person who want to be a cop. They see the system and they love the system so much they're willing to kill to protect that system. These are not the people who built revolutions. I just want to bring that up because that's such a good point you bring up, Edwin. And
well, and I'll make the last point on what you said. But they've convinced our youngsters, they've convinced our community by some high level incentives, right? You'll start off at $100,000 in San Francisco. You'll get a pension at 75% when you retire. You don't need a college degree. You can graduate high school.
Yeah.
And you get a job. And so for many of our folks, they're like, well, if I can't make it out, this seems like a great avenue. The same is true for the military. Like it's a game they play with our folks, and it kills us.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get Alan in here, and then we go Carl next. Anything you want to add? We originally talking about the defund slogan, but anything you want to chime in on based on what Tiffany or Edwin said, feel free to do that as well. Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to the defund slogan, my view on that has always been that anyone who wasn't part of the organizing that led to the development of that term doesn't have the right to critique it.
Yes.
That term was developed specifically to accomplish a specific purpose. If you weren't involved in the development of that term, you don't have the right to critique it. That is the term, or that is the slogan. But secondly, I think that, back to, what both Tiffany and Owen said, there's both a misunderstanding problem, but there's also a values problem that I want to mention. And I could give a Child Protective Services example. A lot of people don't probably realize only 16% of children in foster care are in foster care because of what the state calls physical or sexual abuse. 70% of children in foster care are in foster care because of what the state calls neglect, which is largely related to poverty. So what we do in this country, we take children away from their parents because they're poor, for poverty, and then we put them in a home with a stranger, and then we pay that stranger money to take care of someone else's child when all that child's parent needs is money. In Texas, we give foster parents $900 a month to take care of someone else's child. What if we just gave that $900 a month to the mom who's struggling to meet their child's need? We wouldn't need foster care. But that's where the misunderstanding is of what defund is about. But there's also a values issue. We're okay using our tax dollars to give $900 to a foster parent, but we're not okay giving that $900 to a poor mother who needs it because of all of the things that we've been constructed to believe about poor mothers, and particularly poor Black mothers. When I say that, often in other sessions, people will say, well, if we give it to the mom, how do you know she's not going to spend it on drugs? That's what people believe about mothers in society. How do you know the foster parent's not going to spend it on drugs? We don't, but we're okay. We have a values-related problem that we're not willing to use the resources that we have to help people in poverty. Instead, we punish them. So there's a values-related problem in this country.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I'm gonna go to Carl here next. You can chime in on and respond to what anyone said, or you also can respond to the main question about the demonization of defund. Do you agree? Do you disagree with that? What are your general thoughts on that and what the messaging should be, Carl?
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks a lot, Nick. And I was going to add to a little piece of what Alan just said. So we create this system in the United States and take children away by it. And I've seen that in criminal cases that I've defended before. People are like, I don't care. I've had mothers say to me, I don't care about my criminal case. I don't care if I go to jail. They took my kid away. That's the only important. And I'm standing there as a criminal defense attorney. I'm like, well, I represent you on a criminal case. And they're like, it's my children. Right. When I had a case where I wasn't representing on the taking the children away, but one of the things that they said on the list was the person didn't have headboards on their bed. I didn't even know that was listed. I mean, that wasn't the single reason, but that was one of the reasons they were saying, like, these children are living in poverty and they're not getting the things that they need. I didn't know a headboard on your bed was that important. So one of the first things I wanted to say is, for all of this, when we say the word crime And when they say the word crime, it is a canard. It is bullshit, right? Because crime is the thing that they want to use, is the thing that they made up as an excuse to control underclasses of people, to control undesirable people, right? So when they say, oh, this crime is increased here, or crime is decreased there, or Democratic cities have less crime, or Republican cities have less crime, all of that, whenever I hear those statistics, they say crime is on the rise. Do you, if we think of this comparison, like people that live in Anacostia in Washington, D.C., by their standards, there would be a lot more crime there than there is on Capitol Hill in the building of Congress, right? And all of us would laugh. They would be like, of course. I mean, they're committing war crimes, right? They're doing massive things. But those in the FBI, standardized crime statistics, all of those things don't exist, right? All the crimes of the Trump family, or I'll say of the Biden family, or of foreign policy of the United States, right? Those things, by definition, are not crimes. Right? Yes. They're not crimes. So we're saying, like, well, how would we reduce, when people say, well, what would you do without the police? What would you do about crime? I say, well, first of all, let's start talking about what you mean by crime, right? Because if someone is shoplifting from a store food, right? The first case where I went to law school at the University of Wisconsin, and I was I worked in a clinical program. That means you're a little law student and you're going to get your first case. My first case was a mother and a father who shoplifted food. Oh no, she wrote a bad check to buy food at a 24-hour grocery store. And it was in the middle of the night. They went in there because it was snowing, and she had an infant child, and they were homeless on the street. And she wrote a check for food. I even now, this is still like 15, 16 years ago, it gives me chills, because if you're that mother or you're that father and you have a checkbook, right, and you're standing outside and it is literally snowing, right? If you go into the supermarket, I'd be like, that's a good parent. That's what you should do. If you have a checkbook and you say, my kid is hungry, and also I'm hungry, and you write that check, I'd be like, well, but that's a crime. That's definitely a crime. And I don't know what happened later, but it's not an unlikely scenario that someone at some point, because she was charged with 3 different felonies: forgery, uttering, and stealing by scheme, because she gave a check, right? Signing the check, giving the check, and getting the stuff. All of those things are crimes. So I think what we need to do is challenge our understandings of a lot of these things, right? When the FBI or you see someone's crime statistics, tell someone, say, look, this is what they are telling you. And I really think the abolition that we talk about now, and the abolition that our ancestors talked about then, is an extension of the same abolition, right? So it's like Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, and the work that those people did is the same work that we're trying to do now, right? Because it's no coincidence that it's the great grandchildren in many cases of those same people who are in chains, who are now in similar chains, or they're in electronic monitoring devices. But I had a long conversation with an aunt of mine. Shout out to my aunt, who will name this right now if she's watching, about defund, and was very upset. She said, we shouldn't say defund. But I actually think this tells us the reason the president of the United States is saying defund is because we put a bug in their ear, because it's something that freaks them out. It's like we said, oh, here's the linchpin that's holding your whole thing together: the police, the policing system, and the military and our foreign policy system in this country. Those are the foot soldiers for internalized oppression and externalized imperialism. And we're like, boop, and we push that button, and they lost their minds. They're like, please stop saying that. If you look at the Democratic tacticians, the people who really, for the Democratic Party, the people who really decide what things are going to happen, those people despise the word. And that is a compliment. That means we're doing something that is getting in their heads. We're putting forward an idea in defund and abolition that is tantalizing to people. I've never really heard someone say, when you say, in a time of COVID, doesn't it make more sense to spend money to protect people's health, to educate people, and to give people things that will make them continue to have a good and happy and long life, instead of giving it to the police department to buy new cars or to buy drone? Like New York Police Department has a drone submarine, right? There's a grandma that passed away somewhere that could have had a mask, that could have had access to food, that instead of them having a drone submarine. And I've never really heard anyone unless they're really reactionary, right, not at least, raise their eyebrows and go, well, what about the really bad crimes?
Yeah, and I actually want to kind of open this up for discussion. If you guys unmute your mic, I'll just call on you guys to make it order. Zoya, you want to chime in because and we go Zoya, Edwin, and Alan. I'll just tell you guys unmute in that order. So Zoya, Edwin, and Alan. Go ahead, Zoya.
Yeah, to Carl's point, this definition of crime has enabled the system of injustice that targets marginalized communities. While police operate with impunity and murder 3 people per day, which we recently learned is actually underreported. So we must start with understanding that the current system is not working. People that are afraid of trying other solutions or what abolish means first have to come to an understanding that what we have does not work. What we have criminalizes people that are struggling. We are proposing alternatives that resolve the root causes. Things like sending social workers instead of armed thugs to help someone experiencing a mental health crisis, having community policing, funding food gardens. We are talking about actually investing in people, which, by the way, to incarcerate people is so expensive that it would cost us less to send them to college and give them an education and provide them a path forward to a future rather than keeping them behind bars. And just for some statistics, the US locks up more people per capita than any other nation at the staggering rate of 573 per 100,000 residents. So we have to realize that these 2 million people that are incarcerated nationwide, and many who are out on probation and parole who still continue to face challenges gaining employment because we continue to put roadblocks in their way of how to proceed with their lives, that this system is simply not working. It creates crime. So our 10 demands, which hopefully everyone has seen, are actually solutions that are based on social science. We are the reasonable position, not supporting a system that does not work. And to that point, I thought we could end by asking everyone, besides whatever they want to discuss, how people can get involved right now in whatever particular causes you're involved in, whatever you're doing in your lives, because this is an activist summit. What can we tell people that they can do right now? People who are moved by this, people who already agree with our positions, what can they do in their local communities as civilians to help shift the situation and get involved in the movement?
Yeah, great question, Zoe. We can go Edwin and Tiffany, and then we go Alan. If you guys don't mind, if you guys want to take
Tiffany,
that
you can go ahead. You raised your hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Tiffany.
I'm really excited to talk about my work. Sorry, I get the Holy Ghost when I talk about.
Yeah, I love to hear it. I love to hear it.
Yeah, so right now, as I mentioned before, the campaign manager of the Frontline, and we are doing election defenders work. I am not a voting evangelist, but I will say that voting is a very important tool that we have to use until we get to a place where it's not the most important tool that we have to use once a year or twice a year sometimes. But the election defenders is a program that was designed with this exact spirit of abolition in mind, because we know that the people that oppose us and the laws that we want and help us on our liberation journey are going to be turning up at the polls this year. They promised some drama in 2020, but they're definitely already doing it in 2022. And so the Election Defenders is a program of community care. We actually show up at voting locations where we have intelligence about different perspective violence, and we're there to be interrupters, so that people don't have to call the police, so that the police don't interfere and discourage people from using their tool to vote and be members of their community. So I invite you, if voting is important to you and you want to make sure people in your community are able to do it safely and not be intimidated by the police or intimidated by people who don't want to see them be able to cast their ballot to join us and become an election defender. And you can go to you can go to thefrontline.org and sign up to be an election defender across the country, and we'll get you trained and we'll get you connected to a local defender. We welcome you to join us because we have to show up for each other and keep each other safe.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. I want to get Edwin in here. Feel free to unmute if you guys want to chime in as well. We're going to wrap this panel up in maybe in the next 7 minutes or so. And I would love to hear from you guys. So also, we can kind of use this as a last word kind of thing too. So Edwin, Zoya's question, how can people get involved? And also use this as a last word, just in case we run out of time as well. So once again, thank you all you guys for joining the panel. It was a great conversation. So go ahead.
No, it's great to be here with folks. I wish we could all meet in person and strategize.
Sure.
Really. To be honest, as far as what to do, I mean, there's so many folks. Tiffany mentioned it, the work of Carl, Alan. I mean, I tell folks, as far as a popular educator, right, you plug in where it speaks to you and not say, oh, this is the only thing I'm focused on, but realizing, as the Panther says, it's this work pending revolution, right? And we continue on that path. So if it's children, if it's the carceral system, if it's education, I mean, it's plugging in, because at the end of it, there is unfortunately a connection with policing, right? Folks mentioned schools. Tiffany mentioned schools, and Zoya, like, why is there people again with handguns, loaded handguns, roaming the halls of our children? We talk about hospitals, right? I work in that. And I make the claim very clearly that unfortunately our hospitals serve as an extension of the carceral system, right? From the folks who come in from the inside and folks who get arrested who don't even have a charge against them, but yet are brought in on 4-point restraints, and they can't even get just dignified healthcare, right? They coming in and people are already presuming that they did something wrong. And so I think it's just finding the space that you exist in, that or that speaks to you. And there are folks who've been doing this work, and this is the thing about the waves, right? George Floyd came, and then everyone, Carl mentioned, right? Everyone is now conscious, and I'm like, beautiful, and I want to see who's going to stick around, right? That's who I want to organize with.
Yeah,
is the folks who are going to stick around, because that's when it is not attractive. That's when it's hard. That's when it's late nights. And I'm getting old, and so we need younger folks as well, because I can't stay up past 9 o'clock. Like we need other folks who can help with the energy. And in all honesty, like I'm not going to claim everyone. For me, our dreams get stale because we've been at this work for so long. And so we need the innovative, creative young minds that say, what about this?
Yeah.
This could look so different. And I've been in moments with youngsters, and I'm like, I never even imagined that. That's unbelievable. And what can we do personally? I mean, I'm a believer that our personal is our politics. I don't call 911. I've never seen a point to call 911. I don't call 911, and because that's where it comes to a head. It becomes real, right? It's not just, abolish the police. It's I'm not going to use you. You are not useful to this community. And so people say, well, what do you do, Edwin? Well, someone broke into our house. My niece was here. And I said, okay, we got a situation. And folks are like, you gotta call the police. And I'm like, for them to do what? What are they gonna do? Right. And look at, wildly enough, that individual who was high on crystal meth came back to our house and was sitting in our front lawn. And I went out to him. I was like, yo, what you doing, man? And he's like, I did something wrong. And I said, what'd you do? And I hadn't connected the dots yet. It was late in the evening. And he said, I did something wrong here. I said, oh, you're the one who broke into my house. And he said, yeah. And I said, Estelle, my wife, I said, can you get the leftovers that we had from last night? We're going to heat them up. And for an hour and a half, we sat and talked with him. And he was, granted, he was high, but he was also like, I kind of want to leave now because I'm scared, because you're feeding the person who broke into your house. And I said, no, I'm doing this because I want you to know that this love is so unconditional, that even when you think you violated us, I'm going to make you have to earn the love that you haven't gotten. And he didn't know what at some point he was like, just call the police on me. I don't want to stay here anymore. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to call it. Because the truth is that actually is the easy way out, right? The easy way out is that we institutionalize people. The hard work is when we say, I'm going to love you even when it hurts you. And I come from the streets. So folks were like, but Ed, now he knows where he lives. He knows your family. And I said, no, he also knows that there's an ultimate respect. And in the streets, you don't violate the community that you respect. And nothing has ever happened since then. But I want us to imagine what a different engagement with our community looks like, even when we get hurt in it. And it doesn't look like what it does today.
Yeah, that was very profound. And each one of you guys on this panel, I could have an extended hour conversation alone with. And there's so much I want to get to. I appreciate all you guys' time, especially considering how last second that we threw this panel together. I want to get Alan and then Carlton here for last words as well. Alan, especially with you and when you brought up an issue with child protection services. Once again, that's something I honestly haven't dug into as much as I probably should have. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and maybe we gotta have a conversation about that another time when we have more time. But any last thoughts, any final words you want to bring to people regarding getting involved, and any last thoughts you have?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to talk about that issue more. But if you're interested in learning more about the movement to abolish child protective services, you can go to our website. It's upandmovement.org. We just had a virtual summit last week featuring with Angela Davis and Mariam Kaba. So if you want to hear more from Angela Davis and Mariam Kaba about this movement, just go to our website, upandmovement.org. The videos are there. I'd say as a last comment, similar to what Edwin said, recognize that mandatory reporting or making calls to child protective services hotlines is not a neutral or benevolent act. It results in harm every time. Harm to the children that are involved, harm to the families are involved, harm to the communities. At Up in Movement, we're actively working with some other groups to try to repeal mandatory reporting laws. So if you want to get involved in the bigger movement, you can go there. But as an individual step, don't call child protective services.
Thank you, Alan. We definitely gotta have a conversation about that. Maybe here soon, but I want to get Carl. Thank you guys all for the time today. Carl, any last thoughts? How should people get involved? And thank you for joining as well.
So I think there's different things in different places, but I mean, during COVID, there were a lot of mutual aid projects and organizations, some a little bit more centrist, some a little bit more radical. Get involved with the centrist ones and change people's minds. Get involved with the radical ones and do that work. Bringing food to people, bringing aid to people. I think alongside that, there are bail funds all across the country, and there's on specific days, sometimes like Christmas bailouts and Black Mother's Day bailouts for Black mothers. Get involved with those, support those financially. Drive to jails and prisons and courthouses and bail people out of jail. You can do the work if you have money or if you don't have money to make human beings free. Like next week, that can happen. It can happen on Monday, and that is astonishing work that sort of popped up. There's people doing cop watch and court watches all across the country. You can get involved with those. If people are a lawyer, a law student, or even if you're not, you can get involved with the work that the National Lawyers Guild is doing, being legal observers. People have probably, I might have a green hat somewhere in my office. People have probably seen us with the green hats, trying to make sure people are protected and documenting what's happening at protests. That's all the concrete stuff. The other thing I'll say, and just as a piece of good news is, I believe we've overcome many things in the past in the march towards liberation, right? I believe that people will be free. And the only question, people will be free. We'll free the land, we'll free the people. That's going to happen. The only question is how long it's going to take. And the answer to how long it's going to take is how many people and how, I would say, confident and radical a position and what people are willing to do to make people free in this country and in the world. And the more we do that, and the more people who are involved in that, the faster that thing is going to happen, because we've overcome greater things in the past. So I think that should be one of the guiding principles. I think the 10 demands to abolition are great steps in that. And I think we need to get down to doing the work, or do more of our work, and convince other people that this is something that can happen.
Yeah.